More now on the rapid fall of Afghanistan. The Taliban now completely in control of that country after taking the city of Kabul. The dire situation there has led to chaos as Afghans are desperately trying any way they can to get to safety. Joining us this afternoon, Bradley Bowman with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And he also served in the Army for 15 years, including a deployment to Afghanistan. Mr. Bowman, it's great to have you along. This is by any measure a serious setback, not just for American foreign policy, but for prestige and a lot of different levels. We were told confidently by the president that such a thing wouldn't happen, and yet it did. Your thoughts this afternoon?
Thanks for the opportunity to join you, and thanks for the question. It truly is a tragic situation. The saddest part of it, I think, is that it was predictable and preventable. You know, President Biden, when he was vice president, pushed for the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq in 2011, a conditions ignoring timeline-based withdrawal. That should sound familiar. We saw we had returned 3 years later when we had ISIS. Unfortunately, he's repeating that same mistake now. This time, he's explicitly admitting that it's a conditions ignoring withdrawal, and Americans in the world are now seeing what happens when you ignore persistent interest and threats and withdraw anyways, and it's a tragic and preventable situation we're seeing there.
Given where things are at this stage, though, are there any options open left to the president? I mean, he could have kept, I suppose, another 2,500, 3,500 troops on the ground. Bagram Air Base, which was sort of, you know, the headquarters, if you will, in the country, was abandoned a long time ago. Where do you put them? I wonder, you know, given what happened, the sequence of events, did he in the end have any alternative to what he's about to announce, we think?
He absolutely did have an alternative. You know, none of the choices were good. I'm not going to sit here and say there was some perfect solution that would have solved everything. I don't think that's serious. But, you know, we had 3,500 troops there in April, with double that number of NATO troops there. Let's remember, just for perspective for your viewers, we had 26,000 troops on Capitol Hill after January 6th. 26,000.
Yes. We
had 3,500 in Afghanistan. And what strategic good were we getting from that? We prevented another 9/11 attack for 20 years. We allowed Afghan women and girls to achieve gains not seen in the history of that country. And we were preventing refugee flows that might destabilize nuclear armed Pakistan. So there were problems happening. It wouldn't have been easy, but providing close air support, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance support, and logistical maintenance support, with the Afghans bearing the brunt of the force, not a single American soldier had died in combat in a year and a half. We could have prevented this catastrophe. The president was warned, he ignored it, and now he owns this.
Was it because of the U.S. troop pullout that ultimately the Afghan security force just basically disappeared? And it wasn't just them, it was the regional and local police agencies as well. Whatever fabric, if you will, of society just was completely rent by our withdrawal.
This was undoubtedly a breathtaking and disappointing collapse of the Afghan security forces, and to say otherwise wouldn't be honest. But I think, in my view, what clearly catalyzed this catastrophe was President Biden's withdrawal. Remember, if you're, you know, any infantryman in the world on a forward outpost, you know, they'll fight hard if they believe that if they're under attack, facing a formidable enemy, if there's close air support coming, they call for it, they'll get help. If they'll have resupply of ammunition, and if they get injured, that they might get medevac to a hospital. But by America abruptly saying, you know, we're cutting it off.
Yes.
Not only did we cut off our air support, most of our air support, but we cut off the maintenance and logistics support to the Afghan Air Force. I mean, that's going to make a lot of the best militaries, infantrymen around the world start to question what they're doing. So that, combined with some longstanding problems that we could discuss with the Afghan military, I think largely explains what happens here. And that's why, and this is not a partisan comment, that's why I put a lot of the blame on the president.
And we also, in the process, basically came very close to cutting off our exit, if you will, our way to get out. Right now, apparently the battle is for the airport, and it's divided in half. There is part that the U.S. military is holding, but the rest of it is at the commercial airport, and it's in the hands of the Taliban.
This is not only a policy failure, which I've been describing, it's respectfully, it's the withdrawal, the military-led withdrawal has been incredibly poorly planned. Giving up Bagram Air Base was a major mistake. Anyone who's been there understands that Kabul International Airport is right there in the city, and that you're going to have these problems, these heartbreaking scenes that we're seeing at Kabul Airport right now. It would have been much better to maintain Bagram Air Base, have that be the last thing you give up,
Yes.
and take out the U.S. folks from there. And that way you wouldn't have this confluence of military activity and civilian activity, which is so sad and unfortunate and unnecessary that we're seeing on the picture right now.
You served in Afghanistan and doubtless had contact with the interpreters and the facilitators, the Afghanis who helped the U.S. military there. There has to be concern about their safety right now. Indeed, there's some reports from the northern part of the country where people, they've been rounded up and summarily executed. So, you know, perhaps the killing has already started. I'm wondering your thoughts there.
Our first strategic priority has to be getting Americans to safety. Right after that, we have to be looking after those Afghans who served shoulder by shoulder with us. I believe we have both a moral and strategic imperative to do that. Strategic imperative because around the world, people are watching. They're saying, what kind of ally is the United States? If I risk my life for them, will they stand by me in my hour of need? So it's a moral thing that we should do here, and it's a smart thing to do. And this administration's trying, but it's going too slow, and they got to speed it up. Why do they have to speed it up? Because of this withdrawal that President Biden chose to make, not on the timeline of the interests of the U.S., but on the timeline enforced by the defunct Taliban agreement.
Trying to predict history is a fool's errand, I grant you, but we went in 20 years ago to try and take care of the Taliban because we were concerned about counterterrorism. It eventually became counterinsurgency warfare. Never minding that, we're out now. At some point down the line, do we have to go back in?
I believe, unfortunately, that we're going to have to go back. There is no sustainable long-term U.S.-American departure. American departure from Afghanistan doesn't involve an Afghan government that can defend its own border and prevent that country from, again, becoming a safe haven for international terrorism. I would just add, you know, Jake Sullivan's comments. Al-Qaeda never left. Al-Qaeda is still there. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we would not have seen the gains in the north without Al-Qaeda's help for the Taliban. The Taliban was expected to separate from the Taliban, under the agreement, was supposed to separate from Al-Qaeda. They never did. In fact, they cooperated in this offensive. We now have in Afghanistan, with its ranks reinforced by thousands of released prisoners, and their arsenals are teeming with new weapons, a Taliban Al-Qaeda terrorist syndicate that murdered 3,000 people. They now have a safe haven again in Afghanistan. And it brings me no joy to say that, but if we're going to have any good policy or strategy going forward, we have to start with that truth.
It is just an appalling situation with which we are confronted here, 20 years almost after 9/11. Bradley Bowman is with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and has been terrific to spend a fair amount of time with us this afternoon. We're grateful for that. Many thanks.
Thank you, sir.